There's a new camera from Sony, it's the ZV-E1, I've got it right here. You can see it's super small, it's super light, it's exactly what you'd expect from something in the ZV range of cameras, and I've got to be totally honest with you up front, this is a review of the ZV-E1, and going into this, when Sony kind of told me about the camera and told me kind of what it is and what it's for, I had kind of built these preconceived notions of what it would be based on the fact that it is a ZV camera rather than an A7 camera, but I've got to be honest, using this for the past few days, I was wrong. I was super wrong about what this camera is and what it's able to do. It takes a lot of different things from other Sony cameras. So for example, the form factor very much resembles something like the A7C, super small, super light, no viewfinder on this, and it is obviously aimed at video, so that kind of makes sense as well. It has the ease of use of the ZV camera, so a lot of the things we see there, like the bokeh switch. It has the AI chipset that you see on the A7R camera, so like the A7R5. There's a lot of really cool AI stuff in here. And then it's got the full frame 12.1 megapixel sensor from the A7S III. And it takes a lot of high-end pro video specs as well. So this really does pull from a lot of different areas within the Sony ecosystem of cameras. And while yes, this does feel like it'd be great for a content creator, for someone like me shooting stuff like this, for someone shooting, whether it's for Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, whatever it might be like that, but it's a bit deceptive because that's just one side of what this camera can do. This is definitely capable of kind of professional video work. I would be very happy using something like this to go and shoot client videos outside of kind of YouTube and stuff like that. I'd be really happy doing that. It is a bit deceptive because it's small and it looks like something like the ZV-1 a little bit, but it's full frame. It's a massive step up even from the ZV-E10, which I thought was a really good camera. And this can quite happily hold its own, which I wasn't expecting. And video is really where this shines as well, because you've got the ability to shoot 4K, there's no pixel binning, 10-bit 422 all intra as well, so you've got some really nice stuff in there. 4K up to 60 frames a second in camera at launch, and then a few months on from the launch, there's gonna be a firmware update adding in 120 frames a second at 4K, or 240 frames a second at Full HD. That means that this is extremely capable. And if I was to take this out on a commercial shoot, so obviously it's great for this kind of thing, but actually going out and shooting proper paid for client videos, I'd be very comfortable using something like this. You've got things like S-Cinetone in camera, you've got S-Log profile as well, which is super useful, and other things you would probably expect from a Sony camera now, so things like focus breathing compensation, which is always nice. And you've also got no recording limit here either, so there's none of that 30-minute recording time limit or anything like that. Now, you're limited to about 95 minutes in terms of battery life, but if you're not using the battery, you can just go and go and go, and it's really just limited by storage at that point. So super, super handy and just really capable outside of just content creation. What this camera excels at in particular, along with being able to shoot some very nice high quality video, is it can do a lot of the work for you. If you're someone who wants to be completely in control and be able to use this as a tool, no problem, you can do that. But if you're someone who wants to be able to do a lot of the work in camera and let the camera handle a lot of that for you, the camera is able to do that. So as an example, there are looks and there are moods that you can add to the actual style of your video. And it's essentially like color grading your footage in camera. Now you can combine the looks and the moods. You've got 5 looks and 4 moods to choose from, so it gives you 17 different combinations for the overall style that your video is gonna be, but this takes color grading out of your hands. You can just do it in camera and get some really interesting footage.
Now add the AI chipset from the A7R5, and the camera is able to help with all kinds of things.
One of the things the camera is able to do is really control the look and the feel of your video based on what you want it to do without you necessarily having to dial in all the settings. And a great example of that is the cinematic vlog setting. This just puts the camera into the most cinematic look, cinematic feel that you can really get from your footage. And the camera will just take care of that for you. When you put it into that mode, it'll affect things like the aspect ratio, the frame rate, that'll set that to 24 frames a second, and you can affect things like the look, the style, and also the AF transition speed. So whether you want it to transition from, as if a focus pull, right? So from front to back, how fast do you want it to transition? It'll change the mood initially to S-Cinetone, and then you can change that again if you want to, but it's gonna try and give you the most cinematic look and feel to your footage. So if you're someone who wants to go out and get some of that B-roll that we're probably very used to in YouTube videos now, and you don't know exactly the best way to set up your camera, it'll just do it for you. That's super interesting. And I love how this camera is set up like that just to make your life as easy as possible and do as much of the work for you as it can. Or if you don't want it to, you just turn those things off. Something that I think is unreal and really, really something I would use all the time, genuinely, if I had this camera, is the AI frame stabilization. So the AI framing stabilization is something which I think is really, really cool. It's something I would actually use an awful lot. So I'm using it right now as I move kind of around my kitchen here. This feels like a good environment to kind of test this out in. And essentially what it's doing is cropping in, and then I've got it set to keep me central in the frame. So as I move around, the camera is actually then moving the frame to keep me central. And even if I go completely out of frame like this, and then come back in, the camera is able to pick me up again and then follow me around. If I was to bend down, it'll follow me down, come back up. That's really cool, right? That's a really impressive feature. Now, that works really well, almost like an AI camera operator. It's just me in here, just me talking directly to the camera. Normally, I would shoot wider and then I could crop in, but because of this, the camera's doing all this work for me, and it adds a little bit of kind of dynamic movement to the shot. If I was in a situation like this and I was going to shoot, let's say, a cooking show, I could actually use this to move around. So I move over here, I use the cooker, that's great. I move over here, I use the fridge, and the camera's following me as if it's a camera operator, which I just think is really, really smart. A great way to use AI like this. And for a solo shooter like me in this situation, this is super valuable. It adds a lot to the shot, which yes, I could add in post, but that's a lot of work afterwards. This is just doing it for me. It's just doing all of it for me in camera. I know what you're thinking. What if you do it and then you don't like it? Well, the great thing about this is you can record like this to your card, no problem, with the framing stabilization on, and simultaneously you can output via the HDMI to whatever you like, without the crop, just as a standard shot. So you've kind of got both options there. So that is probably the way I would do it most of the time, so that I've got the backup of the wide shot as well. But honestly, this is something that I think is really, really cool. You also have AI multi-face recognition in the camera. So it's able to change the aperture based on how many people are in the frame. If it's just a single person in the frame, it can leave that aperture nice and wide open, so you get a nice shallow depth of field. If a second person comes into frame, the camera is able to stop down the aperture and actually make sure that both people are in focus. That's really, really impressive. And not only is it impressive by itself, this is the kind of thing that just means you don't need someone behind the camera operating it. This means the camera takes a lot of the work away from you and does it for you. It really feels like having a camera operator behind the camera, but you don't. It's just the camera doing all of it. This, along with things like that AI framing stabilization, really feel like the kind of things the AI should be used for in cameras. It feels like it takes this stuff to the next level. So let's talk about the autofocus in the camera. Now, it almost seems a bit of a moot point with Sony cameras now because they're so good. It's absolutely ridiculous how good they are. And that's certainly the case here. Tracking, no problem. It's able to keep up whether you're doing vlogging up close, whether you're doing something a little bit further away, when you're tracking people moving fast. We see the same AI chipset as the A7R5. So it's able to do really quite extreme subject recognition on people. It doesn't just rely on the face and the head. It's able to recognize people by the way people would pose or stand, which is great, especially if you're talking about silhouetted or lighting situations that aren't just absolutely ideal. It can even track a person wearing a helmet, so without a face, which I think is just really impressive. And you've got subject recognition and tracking of people, animals, birds, trains, planes, cars, insects. There's a lot that you can do with this. So obviously as a ZV camera, this is definitely set up for vlogging as well. So it'd be great for this kind of thing. I'm out right now with just the camera. I'm literally just holding the camera in my hands. I've got the screen flipped out so I can see myself. There's the little red square around the screen. There's a tally lamp so I know it's recording. But otherwise the camera is doing all the work in terms of image stabilization and in terms of autofocus and all that kind of stuff. I can see a little square around my eye, even though I've got my glasses on. No problem. Tracking me, absolutely fine. Now, image stabilization, let me tell you, that is really, really impressive on this camera. So there's three different kind of settings for it. You've got the standard steady shot, which we know and we're familiar with Sony cameras. Then we've got two other modes. We've got the active mode, which I'm using right now. There's a slight crop but it just helps to stabilize the footage. And then we've got dynamic active as well, which I'll show on screen, me just walking through the woods a little bit using that. And that actually looks pretty much like a gimbal shot. It is so smooth, and that's walking, which I always think is pretty much the most difficult thing when you're talking about handheld. Now, was I being careful while walking? Yes, but even so, very, very, very smooth. Something else to consider in terms of vlogging with a camera like this is, of course, that like the other ZV cameras, this has got the directional microphone on top of the camera. So right now, I've got it set to recording towards the front, but you can change this. So you can have it recording towards the rear if you are actually filming with the camera and you want to speak as well. You can have it obviously to the front now, so filming me, I obviously want the microphone pointing towards the front. You can set it to off, or you can set it to auto as well. So the camera will actually detect where the noise is coming from that it should be picking up. Man, it's muddy here. And then, and then it'll actually automatically decide which is the best kind of direction to pick. Now, we've touched on it a little bit, but let's talk specifically about the design of the camera. This is obviously a very small and lightweight camera. It kind of gets that form factor from the A7C, which is really nice for kind of portability, for taking this out and about as a run and gun camera. Like I've mentioned earlier, you could build this out, let's say with a cage or something like that, to really build it as a pro video system. But it's absolutely designed with kind of portability in mind. Now, there's no viewfinder on the camera. That's obviously a deliberate choice to keep it really nice and small, and probably because this is aimed more at video. Maybe Sony felt it didn't need to have a viewfinder. I like a viewfinder, but I get why it's not on here, so that's not a problem at all. Of course, you've got the flip out screen, which is touch control as well, and the touch actually does work really nicely. So it means you don't have to have loads of buttons, but we do have some nice controls on the back as well. Now, no joystick, which makes sense because of how small the camera is. I do miss it. I just like having a joystick on the back of a camera, but you can move that focus point really easily on the screen. And to be honest, you probably don't need to control where the focus point is. The autofocus is so good, you can just rely on it and let it do it for you. Otherwise, we see a nice switch at the top here for stills, video, and then the S&Q mode if you want to shoot like some slow motion stuff. So that's always nice at a glance to see what you're shooting. Something else which is quite nice, which we see on these, is we've actually got the zoom lever as well. So if you use something like the 16 to 35 power zoom lens, you can be able to control that straight from the camera right here, which is lovely. Now, because it's quite small, I think there's quite a decent grip on here. It's not too bad. It is reasonably comfortable, but because it's quite small, as a handheld run and gun system, I have quite big hands. I'm a big guy, right? It's possibly a little bit small for the way I would like it to feel. I would probably go for a slightly larger camera. So that's something to think about. But like I said, you could just build this out with additional things on there, a cage, if you want to use it like that. And otherwise, we see some decent connections on the side. So we've got micro HDMI, we've got headphone, we've got 3.5mm jack as well. So you can add a microphone in there, you can add headphones in there. So again, that's something you would expect on a video system like this. It does only have the one card slot, which I get it. It's not being touted as a pro camera, but I think if I'm being honest, for a camera at this level in terms of price point and stuff like that, I would probably want to see 2 card slots. It's not the end of the world, but it would be nice to have that on there. Otherwise, I've got to say, it has been extremely easy to use this camera, both in terms of kind of operation with the menus and stuff like that, and actually the buttons on the camera itself. It's very light. It's very, very light, and it's small. So having used this for a little while now, I can comfortably say that it really blew my expectations out of the water. I didn't expect to like the camera this much, and I didn't expect to come away actually genuinely considering upgrading to this camera. It suits someone like me just remarkably well. If you actually film yourself like I do all the time, this is just going to be an incredibly useful camera, right? I mean, just the flip out screen, being able to see yourself like that, super handy. But being able to track yourself moving and actually essentially add some dynamic movement to the shot as if there's someone operating the camera, or being able to do the vlogging. If you're someone who knows exactly what they want to do, you want to go shoot some client video and you want to do it completely in control, no problem. You just turn those features off and use this as a very capable video-centric camera. But if you want to be able to film yourself and let the camera handle a lot of that work, or if you're someone who wants very good quality video, but doesn't necessarily know exactly how to get it, or wants to leave the work up to the camera, This is absolutely remarkable. You know, this is definitely not just a vlogging camera. This is great for solo shooters, but to be honest, you can get a lot out of a camera like this. Check out the camera for yourself, the pricing, all the full spec, everything. There's loads to go and look at by following the link in the description. Don't forget to like and subscribe as well. We've got new content all the time. I'll see you in the next video, but until then, as always, thanks for watching.